Now it's doing that. Share the screen. Almost there. All right. That seems to have everything in place. Uh, that means we should be good to go. Let's just give it a minute for anyone still logging in to, well, to log in, and then we'll get down to work. As you can see from those of you joining that we are on Deuteronomy, Devarim 26. We are at the very beginning of Parashat Ki Tavo. As we have been seeing for many of the chapters of Torah recently, we are going to focus on what happens when we enter the land of Israel. A lot of things are going to happen. There's a lot of history about to take place, but there are also going to be many mitzvot that will kick into gear. Just a little reminder that at this point we've spent 40 years living off manna, and the man follows its own set of rules, to say the least, something we've talked about in previous classes. But once we step across that threshold, across the Jordan River, well, we're going back to being pastoralists and agriculturalists again. And that means that the rules regarding our use of the land will snap into place. But as always, it's good to know those rules in advance. And you might be wondering, well, what importance are those rules to us now? After all, we are not biblical characters. We are not even farmers. And for the vast majority of those that are studying with me, we're not living in the land of Eretz Israel either. Well, obviously, it's important to study simply Lishma, simply because it is part of Torah, but also there are elements to the story that are still relevant for each day and the way that we live among each other, as well as our relationship with God. So as a illustrative section, it still has much to offer. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and dive into our Torah text first, and then we'll, as usual, follow it up with our commentary. Just rearrange my screen a little for ease. Now it shall be, when you enter the land that Adonai your God is giving you as an inheritance, and you possess it and settle in it, our preamble, you are to take from the premier part of all the fruit of the ground that you produce from your land that Adonai your God is giving you. You are to put it into a basket, and you are to go to the place that Adonai your God chooses to have his name dwell. Eventually, of course, this will be Yerushalayim, the city of Jerusalem. But as you'll see, this is these first offerings are going to be accompanied by a very powerful declaration, beginning in verse 3. And you are to come to the priest who is there in those days, and you are to say to him, I announce today to Adonai your God that I have entered the land that Adonai swore to our fathers to give to us. So we are doing the sort of setting the stage. I am here for this particular moment, and it is going to then have this basket involved in the ceremony. Then the priest is to take the basket from your hand and is to deposit it before the altar of Adonai your God. And you are to speak up and say, before the presence of Adonai your God, an Aramean of flight, my ancestor. Right. This is one of those great verses. The Oved, Arami Oved Avi, that gets a lot of discussion, which we've gone over before, and we're not going to rehash today. But if those words sound familiar, or at least some of the translations of them, that may be because this is a central part of the Haggadah, our retelling of the story of the Exodus. As we'll see in these few short verses, we are going to summarize our entire experience up to this point. He, meaning our ancestor, went down to Egypt and sojourned there, as menfolk few in number. But he became there a nation great, mighty, meaning in number, and many. Now the Egyptians dealt ill with us and afflicted us and placed upon us hard servitude. So we cried out to Adonai, the God of our fathers, And Adonai hearkened to our voice. He saw our affliction and our strain and our oppression. As you may recall, each of these are gone into much more detail through the midrashic examples in the Haggadah. And Adonai took us out from Egypt with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm, with great awe-inspiring acts and with signs and portents. And he brought us to this place, meaning the land of Israel, and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So all of that was a prelude to the main point. So now, here I have brought the premier part of the fruits of the ground that you have given me, O Adonai. Then, meaning now that the declaration is done, you are to deposit it before the presence of Adonai your God, and you are to bow down before the presence of Adonai your God. So this whole recap of our history is simply a poetic summary prior to the actual placing of the fruit as an offering. And just as a quick aside, although it will not be our focus today, you might be wondering, well, why go through the trouble of this preamble when really it's just fulfilling the mitzvah of bringing these fruits should be sufficient? Well, because as always, Judaism wants there to be a intentionality, a kavanah, a focus. And every time we are bringing something from the ground that Adonai gave us, this land of milk and honey, we are meant to recall not just the hard work that went into growing it this year, not just the worries and struggles that a farmer or a shepherd face, and not even just our gratitude for God's blessings at this moment, but the entirety of history that has led to this point. This is a way of quite literally staying grounded, that is to say, rooted into the earth itself and rooted into the experience of history, so that even if it is somebody who did not live through the Exodus, that could be many, many generations later, and has no firsthand knowledge or has never met someone with firsthand knowledge of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, nonetheless, we should imagine ourselves as part of that chain. We should imagine our bounty today as being rooted in the Exodus in the past. That continuity of feeling and of emotion is a key element to so much of Judaism, that it is not just enough to live in the present, but to see the present as a thread that extends all the way back into the deep past. But like I said, this is not our main focus for today, so let's just continue on a little bit more. Verse 11, and you are to rejoice in all the good things that Adonai your God has given you and your household, you and the Levite and the sojourner who is in your midst. This is not something that we celebrate entirely on our own. We have to bring in other people into this party, this celebration as well. Now, oftentimes this would be enough to study, but like I said, we have covered it more, but I want to show what comes afterwards because it is similar yet different, and as such, we will learn new things. Beginning now with verse 12 for the main focus of our conversation today. When you finish tithing, all the tithe of your produce. This is a different set of gifts that we give at different intervals. In the third year, the year of the tithe, you are to give it to the Levite, to the sojourner, to the orphan, and to the widow, that they may eat it within your gates and be satisfied. So this particular tithe, the third year tithe that's being mentioned here, is a tithe that is designed to support those that do not have access to the land itself to support themselves. So somebody that is a Levite, not given a portion of land when we came into the land of Israel. Somebody who is a sojourner, again, they are not part of the original allocation process. Where will they be growing their food? Likewise, an orphan or a widow also have a very high chance of being alienated from any land to be able to support themselves. Verse 13, we're making another declaration, it seems. And you are to say, before the presence of Adonai your God, I have removed the holy part from the house, and I have also given it to the Levite, to the sojourner, to the orphan, and to the widow, exactly as your command that you have commanded me. I have not crossed over away from your commandments. I have not forgotten. Continues. I have not eaten of it while in sorrow. Maybe that's what it means. The oni is something we're going to have to unravel. I have not removed any of it while tameh, while ritually impure. I have not given any of it to the dead, which is a very strange sentence. I have hearkened to the voice of Adonai, my God. I have done exactly as you have commanded me. Look down from your heavenly abode from heaven and bless your people Israel and the ground that you have given us, as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. Okay, so notice that this is a second declaration, and again, it is invoking the gift of the land while participating in the tithing process. In particular, focused on who we have given it to when appropriate and what we have not done with it that would be inappropriate. Now, it's, as always, a little odd. Why are we making a declaration for the tithing rather than simply doing it? Why are we making this declaration after the giving of the tithe rather than before it, where we normally would make a declaration? What are these different stipulations that are involved? I mean, after all, if we go back to our primary list here of things that we might have done wrong, do you need to tell me that do I need to declare that I didn't use it inappropriately? If I used it inappropriately, that's already revealed before God. It's already a transgression. Why do I need to say I haven't used it inappropriately? Just I won't use it inappropriately. And also, I also pointed when we first read through verse 14 that stipulation that I did not eat it, the oni, where it seems to imply sorrow, is a debated term. And likewise, when we talk about giving it to the dead, it is a debated phrase as well. We might take it as a very superficial reading of giving to the dead, of eating with, sorry, taking it, let's get my words in order, of eating it while in sorrow and being ritually impure and giving it to the dead might sound like three parts of the same act. But we'll find in our commentary that it could be a little bit more confusing than that. So before we go to the commentary, are there any questions or comments, either in the Zoom chat, YouTube chat, or if you want to unmute, you can also participate. Not seeing anybody doing so, so why don't we go ahead and jump into, as always, if you are a little late because of the YouTube lag or something, feel free to go ahead and still put in a question or comment, and I will get to it as soon as I notice it. All right, so let's talk just a little bit about this structure of the tithing, because I know it's always confusing, and Rashi tries to spell it out for us here. I have removed the hallowed things, the holy things, the sacred things. This refers to the second tithe and the fruit of the vineyard in the fourth year of its growth, as we see in Leviticus 19. Scripture, meaning Torah, teaches us that if he has delayed his second tithe of the first 2 years of Shemitah period, meaning the every 7-year cycle, and has not taken them up to Jerusalem, he must bring them up now. So we can go ahead and bring them up a little bit late. Obviously, we should bring them up when it was most appropriate. Continuing, Rashi says, I have also given them to the Levite, which we talked about. This refers to the first tithe. That is the tithe for the Levites. And also, well, why do we also have the word also, right? The redundant word also serves to also include truma. Truma is one of the types of gifts that we give to the Kohanim, which is a subcategory of the Levites, and the first fruits that one has failed to give to the priests. So all of these are based upon Sifrei for Devarim, this midrash from the very early strata of the rabbinic period. And Rashi continues to add to us, and unto the strangers, the fatherless, and the widow. This refers to the tithe of the poor. So we can see that there are many different parts of tithes. They happen at different times or different years. Sometimes it's going to the Levites, sometimes it's truma to the Kohanim, sometimes it's first fruits, sometimes it's gifts to the poor. Tithing is not a one and done kind of activity. There are multiple actions happening here, multiple people being taken care of. But today's focus isn't on the tithing, but I just wanted to set up this concept of the overall feel of the tithing system. Okay, so let's get down now to the main point. According to all your commandments, again, this is part of the declaration, I have given them in the sequence prescribed for them. I've done it right. I have not set aside the heave offering before the first fruits, nor the tithe before the heave offerings, nor the second tithe before the first. Right? I've done them in the proper order because, as anyone who's ever done math knows, the order of operations matters. If you try to do the adding before the multiplying or the multiplying before the adding, you will get different results. And so you need to set up your formulas correctly to make sure you are in compliance. And that's what Rashi says is happening here. And as you can see, the tithing system is fairly complicated, so it's understandable that it would take a little extra focus. So this would indeed have meant altering the sequence for the heave offering is after the first fruits, which are naturally the first of all sacred gifts, termed firstling in its relation to the tithes, because it is the first gift due after it, meaning the crop, has become, that is to say, grain, meaning that it's after that winnowing. So it would be very easy to get this sequence wrong, and it would be very easy to take out of one before taking the second portion. But of course, that would change that second portion. And if the second portion was meant to be the first portion, then now you've reduced it from what it should be, and we're in trouble. So Rashi says, we got to make sure that we get this right. And then, as he points out, one last little element here about the tithing system in general. I have not transgressed your commandments. I have not set apart as a sacred gift grain from one species as a substitute for what was due from another species, nor have I separated grain from the new crop as a substitute for what was due from the old one. So it's not just that I did them in the correct order, but as I did them, I also did them correctly in and of themselves. And there would be a temptation to think that you were doing something right. You might even be doing something, quote, better by substituting. After all, if the value of the tithe is what's important, not the content of the tithe, then I should be able to, swap things around a little bit and use different grains as long as the totals are still adding up. But that's not the way the tithing system was designed to work. As we saw from the declaration, one of the underlying feelings behind the whole tithing system is that I am sharing from what I was blessed with, the literal bounty of the land that I was given through this long cycle of history. Therefore, I shouldn't be picking and choosing what I think I should pass on as part of the tithe. I should be giving what I was actually given as appropriate for that tithe. The percent should come from the actual thing I grew in the actual proportion it's supposed to be taken. Now, that is something that I think we often wrestle with, because if the value is fungible, if the grains are interchangeable, what does a poor person care whether they're eating wheat or barley, as long as they get the right amount? That is to say, the total value. I'm not changing the cost to me. I'm just substituting one version from another. Why should that be a problem? Well, because then you're not actually passing on the literal blessing that you received. And so Rashi is pointing out here, in the words of our sages, that passing on the precise blessing that you received is a strong way of encouraging a person to focus on the blessing you received, the literal blessing that is now in your hands, that is allowing you to pass this on. And when we begin to make everything fungible, when we throw it all into the same bucket and then let it get mixed up, we are losing sight of that original source for the blessing from which we are doing the tithing. All right. Any questions or comments? All right. Not seeing any. So let's go ahead and dive in to our commentary about this. So, nor have I forgotten. What are we talking about forgetting here? Well, what we're talking about, says Rashi, is forgetting to bless when setting the tithes apart. You may remember I mentioned that this declaration is happening at the end of the process of all the tithing. But what about at the start, where we normally see a focus, a kavanah, some statement or declaration to direct our thoughts? Well, Rashi is hinting that the forgetting that's being mentioned here would be the blessing that was said at the beginning of the tithing process, which is merely implied. As Siftei Chachamim, which is a commentary on Rashi's commentary, explains, to bless you for the setting aside of tithes, meaning to actually do a Baruch Atah, a standard blessing. And as the Rebbe comments, it means from praising and blessing you at the time of setting aside the tithes. But it does not mean from reciting the formal blessing for the one who is setting aside tithes, because that formal blessing is a text instituted by the men of the Great Assembly, and for the blessing upon the performance of mitzvot are only rabbinically ordained. So this is something that I think many of us don't always appreciate, which is to say that when it says that we are to bless God, as Rashi is mentioning, what we are actually saying is that we are to make a statement praising and blessing God at that time, but that statement itself doesn't have to be a formal statement. Yes, I use the Baruch Atah to give you that little bridge, but the Baruch Atah formulation, the Asher Kidishanu B'mitzvotav formulation, that came much later. At this point, almost 1,000 years after this part of the Torah was written by the men of the Great Assembly, which was the time period following the return from Babylon and the establishment or reestablishment of the Jewish state under Ezra and Nehemiah, and prior to the end of or the beginning of the end of the Second Temple period, where we see things being cataloged by the Mishnah, by the Midrash, and then onwards into the Talmud. So those formal blessings are rabbinically ordained. The Torah just says, say something of praise, say something of blessing. It is only later that the Great Assembly sets down a formal formula for how that should be done. And the distinction between that which is a derabanan, a mitzvah that is of rabbinic decree, as opposed to a deoraita, a mitzvah that is of biblical decree, is an important distinction to bear in mind. We still do both types of mitzvot, but there are some circumstances where we need to bear that distinction in mind, but we also need to bear it in mind simply as we are focusing on what we are about to do. Okay, so that's our general statement about declarations here. But as I mentioned, there were details within our declaration that seem a little ambiguous. The idea of this oni, of giving it to it while sorrowful, or of giving it to the dead, those require additional explanation. So let's go ahead and take a look. But first, we just need to have a little drink of tea. Okay, so the word on is used here, meaning in our verse, in the same sense as it is used in Job 20:10, where it refers to the process of robbery. Wait, I thought we were talking about mourning. Well, yes, but if you look in Job 20:10, it uses the phrase here, by his own hands he must give back his wealth. And we find it also in that same sense in Hosea 12:9, I have become rich. And there it is also clear that the riches derive from robbery. This, says Rashbam, is the peshat, is the plain meaning of the line. So we've talked about Rashbam before and Rashi, and this struggle to reach peshat, to reach the plain meaning of a verse. And what Rashbam is arguing is that the plain meaning of the verse is that my tithing did not involve robbery, that I did not do anything that was illicit with regards to this tithing process, that I didn't steal. And that, he believes, is the plain meaning. As we're going to see, that's not the more common meaning, which is why the translation is something else. But Rashbam is very committed to the idea of making sure we know the peshat meaning before we know the midrashic meaning. Now, is he right? Well, there are plenty of other commentators that will argue with him, and we're going to look at them. But the idea that how to understand a particular word that can be ambiguous, that can have multiple meanings, is always going to be a challenge whenever we are studying the biblical texts. So let's go ahead and we'll see what the alternative meaning is, and that is going to come from his grandfather, Rashi. I have not eaten thereof in my mourning, or in my sorrow, as was also used in our translation. From here, we may derive that it is forbidden to an onen. All right, so an onen is a official category of person, and as you can tell, oni, right? That does sound very similar. So it certainly is a strong possible definition. An onen is a category of a person that is between the moment when their loved one has died and the burial takes place. Now, in Jewish practice, that is very, very close together. In some parts of Israel, we are able to do it in the same day. And even here in the US, where we have other regulations to work with, it's usually within only a couple days. Excuse me. It's usually only within a couple days. So that narrow window of between death and burial, one would not be able to eat from any of the produce that's been discussed in these sections. And that's going off that word on, which Rashi is taking to mean being an onen, being somebody in the midst of that deep sorrow. Now, why would that be in deep sorrow? Well, Ibn Ezra will explain this a little bit more clearly. The word oni, my mourning, is similar to the word oni, meaning sorrow, as in Benoni, the son of my sorrow, which was where Benjamin got his name from originally by his mother before his father rephrased it so that it wasn't going to have a sorrowful name for his whole life. Instead became son of my right hand, Benjamin. But obviously his mother, who was dying from the birth, was feeling very differently at that moment. And of course, the word onim for mourners, as in the bread of mourners from Hosea 9:4. All right, so now we've got two different versions of what this word might mean. It could mean robbery in the sense of Job and Hosea 12. It could mean sorrowful in the sense of Genesis 35 or Hosea 9. You can see that even Hosea is using this word in two different ways. Well, this is the richness of language. And this is the complexity of trying to understand what it might mean to us in context. Rabbinic scholarship is all about trying to track down how any one part of the Torah relates to any other part of Torah in its broadest sense, Tanakh, Mishnah, Midrash, or any other element. And here Ibn Ezra is coming down on the side that most of the evidence is leaning towards the idea that this is something about sorrow and mourning rather than something about theft, which is what Rashbam's opinion was. And I will point out that Rashi and Ibn Ezra, the ones who argue that this is about sorrow or mourning, are the majority view. They are the ones who win the day, if you will. They are the ones whose opinions are reflected in halacha, as Mishnah Bikurim from the Rashi quote will attest, and that is what we actually practice. So Rashbam certainly knew this. As I mentioned, Rashi was his grandfather, so he was 2 generations later. He knew what his grandfather had said. He studied with him commonly. So why did he argue that own was instead having to do with theft rather than having to do with mourning, if not only his grandfather, but the entire Jewish legal principles were focusing the other direction? Well, he did that because he thought that the word itself really legitimately on its own probably meant theft more than anything else. And he's not arguing that the halacha is wrong because of that. He is simply trying to point out that it is part of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, that we would read this as being regarding sorrow more than regarding theft, because in his mind, the linguistic connection to the usage of own to mean theft is stronger. He's not trying to upturn anything. He's not trying to change practice, but he does have a devotion to what does the word probably mean in the simplest understanding of this verse. All right, so that's our attempt to uncover this own issue. But as I mentioned, we also have to talk about the mention of doing anything here with the dead. And that's going to pick up again with Ibn Ezra for the needs of the dead. Like he said, that seems a little bit strange. What do we mean by that? Well, he brings the option that others say the reference is to idol worship. Doesn't seem self-apparent, does it? Well, offering to idols are called sacrifices to the dead, as reflected in Psalms 106:28. For idols have no more life than a corpse. As part of Judaism's implacable opposition to idolatry, we often refer to idols as dead, as being lifeless. As such, if you are bringing it to the dead, then this is euphemistically saying we didn't use any of our tithing or things that were tithed from to serve any idol. So it is simply coming as a euphemism here. Now, why would all of these things be listed? Ibn Ezra explains, these things are enumerated because it is prohibited to use the grain for any purpose before giving of the tithe, which is holy. If he gives of the remainder, he is acting disrespectfully. This is certainly so if you exchange it for something unclean. So why do we have this list? Because we are reminding ourselves that we don't get to take something else off the top of the harvest and then tithe from what's left. Instead, before we give anything, before we take that tithe, the entire produce is considered to be sanctified. It is as though it is under an umbrella of sanctity, and we have to separate out the tithe, which then transfers the sanctity of the total to only that portion which is going to be given as the tithe, which means the remainder of the produce is now desanctified and free for other uses. If we were to take anything from it before tithing, then we are literally stealing from sanctified property. As such, we are making a declaration here that we have not done that. You might be wondering, but that still seems obvious. I mean, I'm not going to misuse sanctified property. I'm not going to misuse the tithing food. So why do you need to tell me this again? Because I know I'm not supposed to. Why do I have to make a declaration? I mean, when I go to the bank, do I have to, when I deposit my money, do I have to say, this is money I haven't stolen? This is money that I didn't get through dealing drugs. I mean, I'm not supposed to be doing those things. What good is those what good are those declarations after the fact? Well, let's keep digging, and I'm sure we're going to find something because I know I put it there. So let's look at Rabbeinu Bachya's help at understanding this. A person engaged in preparing for the funeral of near relatives is forbidden to eat any sacred foods. So this is again coming from Sifrei, the idea of being the onen, this window between death and burial, where you are preparing for the funeral for your immediate relatives. You are not allowed to eat from any sacred foods. That's what this section means. And I did not set it aside while contaminated, meaning while I was ritually impure, and I did not use it to buy a coffin or other necessity for the dead person's burial for the proceeds of the produce designated as tithes. As you can see again, and I mentioned at the outset, all three of these, when read this way, link together very nicely. I didn't do it while I was in this pre-burial mourning state. And of course, I would have been helping my loved one to get prepared for death, which means I would have been ritually impure because involved in a body does that. And the for the dead means I didn't use any of this produce as money to buy things that would be needed for the burial. Now, the reason that the Torah makes the farmer recite this is not only did he not use the proceeds from such produce for something merely permitted, but even if he had misused it in order to fulfill a commandment, such as a burial from the proceeds, this is also forbidden, and he has to declare that he has not done so. In other words, one must not appear as if one pays one's debts by diverting funds destined for another commandment in order to do so. The tithes must be used only for food and drink. One must not even buy clothing from the proceeds. So as he's trying to explain here, the average person, while doing their internal debate about what to do in preparation for someone's burial or what to do with tithes, will naturally think, of course, I have things I need to tithe. I'm not allowed to take that and misuse it. I can't, take the proceeds and go to Vegas and, gamble at roulette. Everybody understands that's not appropriate. But that little part of our mind says, but I do need to buy a coffin. I do need to prepare for so-and-so's burial. And right now, I don't have a lot of liquid assets. After all, it's just harvest time, which is why I've only just gathered and I haven't tithed things. I could just use some of this extra produce before tithing for preparing for the burial, for, purchasing the things that are needed. And after all, a mitzvah is a mitzvah, right? I mean, the mitzvah of tithing, the mitzvah of taking care of the deceased, these are both mitzvahs. And if I'm using the produce for one or the other, I mean, does it really matter? I'm still doing a commandment with it. It's just a different commandment. Well, no, says Rabbeinu Bachya and our tradition, you don't get to substitute one commandment for another. This is a false equivalency that many of us slip into, not just with commandments, but for many activities in our lives, where we substitute doing one thing for another. For example, if you were rude to somebody at work, and then you get home and you are really feeling bad about that, you can't make up for being rude to the person at work by being extra nice to your spouse. I mean, it's fine being extra nice to your spouse, but those don't balance each other out. The rudeness to your coworker has to be dealt with in proper teshuvah by going up to them, by apologizing to them, and expressing your regret and contrition and working to overcome that actual problem with them, not by substituting that effort by doing something else that is also good, but not the same thing. We can't swap them out. It's not a question of how many points have I stacked up and how many points have I lost, and as long as I come out ahead, then I'm good. While that is technically true, that is not a good mentality, because it means that we will often leave many things done badly, and we will continue to do them badly because we think we can balance them out by compensatory actions in some unrelated activity. Commandments are not interchangeable. Commandments are not fungible. Just like the actual proceeds that we are talking about here, every mitzvot stands on its own. You can't cheat on how you celebrate Shabbat if you are going to be a little stricter on how you take care of kashrut. You can't cheat on how you are being honest in your business by going above and beyond by how you give tzedakah to the poor. No. While it's great to give tzedakah to the poor and great to be careful with kashrut, they don't cancel anything else out other than their own mistakes if you are fixing them. So that fungibility is a flaw. Your dollars and cents from regular income, sure, those are fungible. You can decide whether to spend them on rent or whether to spend them on that trip to Vegas. But when it comes to commandments, one commandment does not substitute for another. Now, we have still been dancing around this question, which I began us with, of why the declaration at all. And Sefer HaChinuch, in his usual way, gives us a very solid explanation. It is from the roots of the commandment, this declaration after tithing, that it is, since the uniqueness of man and his great praise, meaning that which makes us amazing, is his speech. Humanity has a capacity for language that is unrivaled in the rest of the world. Not to say that animals don't have means of communication, but when compared to the richness and variety of our communication, it is a distant second. Such that with language, he exceeds all the types of creatures, as I said. As were it from the angle of the other movements, other animals also move like him. So, if what made us special was how we move, we are a bipedal creature. Well, there's other bipedal creatures. Go find an ostrich. It's not about our anatomy. It is about the texture of our communication. And hence, there are many people that are more afraid to disqualify their speech in that it is in great splendor than sitting in deed. So what he's trying to say here in typical translation of Middle Ages Hebrew is those that have fully grasped what it is to be human, may be even more careful with how they speak than with the other deeds that they perform with their body. because the other deeds with our body are, kind of parallel to the actions of animals, which, are good and appropriate and we need to be careful about. But this, our speech, is uniquely human. And if we are reckless with that, then we are stripping away that which makes us most human, that which makes us most unique in this world. So it takes even more of our focus to protect that, and we should be even more careful with our speech than we are with other deeds. And in the matter of tithes and priestly tithes is a great thing, meaning the speech, and also because the sustenance of the servants of God is dependent upon them. After all, this is how they are going to survive. It was from his kindness upon us, so that we do not sin with them, to warn us about them, to separate them, and that we do not touch and benefit from them indeed, and also that we testify about ourselves with our mouths in the holy house, that we did not lie about them, and we did not withhold anything of them, so that we be very careful about the matter. So imagine, if you will, two different people. One who is asked to declare publicly that they have not misused anything that was meant to be tithed, and another who is just bringing the tithes without any declaration. Sefer HaChinuch argues that the second person will have greater flexibility within themselves to justify potential misuse. That if you know you are going to have to verbally declare, I didn't do anything that was inappropriate, then you are more likely from the outset to actually avoid doing anything inappropriate. Take it from a different direction. If your boss gives you an assignment and says, I need you to take care of these 5 phone calls and these reports, et cetera, and that's it, then, you'll get to work and you'll do what you do. But if he says, and at the end of the day, I will need you to come in and tell me that you did everything exactly right, that you didn't, skip any of these calls, that you were following our protocol and handling each of these issues, et cetera, and I will expect you to actually say that. Likewise, if you've ever filled out a form, you may have noticed that there is a little line at the bottom that says, sign here, and often there's a line that says, I swear that I didn't do anything inappropriate on this form. Well, that's because it does make a difference. If people know that they will be held accountable to actually declare, I stand behind this, they will often behave better from the outset. And that seems counterintuitive to us because it shouldn't make a difference that whether I do something or don't, if I break the rules or not, well, if I've already broken the rules, why not just lie about it? It turns out that for many of us, we actually do sometimes have more difficulty lying about whether we broke the rules than we do about breaking the rules in the first place. And by putting this little extra declaration in, God is helping to encourage us to listen to that part of ourselves that says, no, you are better than this. You are a human, and you are not going to sully your speech. Yes, your hands, your feet, the rest of your body may stumble and fall and do all sorts of other things. But if you have to actually stand and use the most beautiful gift that humanities have and swear to something that is a lie, then you should think twice before doing this, because you are dehumanizing yourself even more than you would just by violating the commandment of misappropriating the tithing. It's counterintuitive, I know, because we live in an environment where falsehood just swarms around us, it swamps us. But for much of our history, and hopefully for many of us still, the idea that I need to be able to look you in the eye and still say, I didn't do anything wrong, and know in my heart that I didn't do anything wrong, that often will be an extra check against our misbehavior. The actions of a moment can sometimes tempt us, but knowing that there will be an after effect, knowing that I will be held accountable, not just before judgment, but I'll be held accountable of how I continue to express myself after this deed, can often be just enough extra tug on the reins to keep us on course and away from the transgression in the first place. As Rashbam goes on to say from his earlier commentary, this is what the Lord your God commanded in order that you not become tardy and hold back your tithes, making a liar out of yourself in the presence of your God. Sometimes we're willing to lie to ourselves. Sometimes we're willing to lie to each other, but we should always be unwilling to lie in front of God. And as such, the Torah gives us opportunities to remind us, you're going to have to stand before God some point and try and explain what you did or didn't do. Are you sure that this is what you want to do right now? Because at some point, you're going to be made a liar if you are going to do this now. You misuse this, and then when you stand and you're bringing that declaration, think about what that's going to be like. Think about how you will feel. It's probably better just not to misuse it now. It's probably better to just do things right the first time and on time. And then when you stand and you make that declaration, your heart will be light, your soul will be uplifted, and you will not have anything to feel ashamed of or to be disgraced by. Your full human dignity will shine out, and ultimately that is what we need to hold on to. Are there any other questions or comments before we wrap it up for today? All right then. Hearing none, we will go ahead and wrap it up. A reminder that we will continue tonight with the prayer class, and hopefully people are getting benefit about that, both with the structure and intentionality. Prayer is one of the chief forms of words that we use in our religious life in a very formal way, and ones that are extremely powerful. So hopefully you're appreciating that if you've joined me for that. And if not, then it is on YouTube as well. And hopefully you'll get some benefit from that there. Take care, everyone, and be well.